Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, my name's Jeremy Stretton and welcome to this webinar, the top 3 speed bumps for small and medium-sized businesses. Thank you everyone for attending. We've got a good turnout this quarter, so hopefully we can get some good information. With me today is Craig Mason.
Afternoon everyone.
And we're going to talk about this topic. I'm going to talk about part of it, Craig's going to talk about the other part of it, and we'll go through, as always, with our webinars. If you've done any of our stuff before, we're happy to take questions as we're going. In the chat box, feel free to post us a question and we'll be happy to proceed. Can everyone just confirm that you can hear me? They've changed the GoToWebinar interface and it is a little bit different, so I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. Could someone type me a message? Possible? Great. Excellent. Thanks, Colleen. All right, well, we'll get started. So, as I said before, the topic today is the top 3 speed bumps that we see in small to medium-sized businesses. And the reason that we wanted to talk about that this quarter was actually this week, if you didn't know, is the Small Business Week, the Queensland Government Small Business Week, and there's been a lot of events that have happened this week about focusing on small businesses and what goes into a small business and all that stuff. So we wanted to tie into that and do an event that was based on Small Business Week and about small businesses. So for anyone who hasn't attended before, and I think most of the people here have attended, we do these on a quarterly basis, and any feedback or any questions that you've got, you can see our email addresses there. We'll send out a copy of these slides, and if you're interested in any other questions, we're always happy to help out and give some guidance. So what's this all based on? So it's all based on the concept that Craig and I have developed, which is called the business legal life cycle. And what that is a concept of when you should do things from a legal point of view on business. And why we developed it was because what we were finding was that our clients, especially our business clients and our referral partners and accountants that we work with and even other lawyers that we work with, really there was no framework on when to do things from a legal point of view in business. It was always, here, we're starting up a business, here's $5,000 worth of work. And what we've found is that most people these days, in the world where you can start up a business with an idea, a laptop and an internet connection, they don't have the money to start that business and to pay all the legal fees that is needed. So what we did is we came up with a concept of what you need to do, when you need to do it, and put that into a business legal life cycle. So I've written a book on the topic, which is, if you're interested, you can email me and I can get you a copy. And it's also available in bookstores and on Amazon. And essentially it goes through and gives, basically addresses 3 topics. The first one is to give people and business owners an idea about some complicated legal terms. Secondly, to give some explanation and examples as to why you do things, because anyone who's in small business knows that it's a lonely thing to do. Small business, it's a lonely place to be. And so what I've done in that book is to give a lot of examples as to why things have happened in the past in business, and to give examples as to show people that they're not alone, that you might have a problem in your business, but in my experience, pretty much every problem that's ever come up that you're facing business has come up before. And the third reason is to give you a plan for the future. So, as I said before, the business legal life cycle is a concept that goes through different stages of the life cycle of business and when you should do things, and gives people a plan. And the hope is that businesses use that, and the businesses that we act for use it, to build a business that will sell for the maximum sale price in the future. So we all know the goal with most businesses is to get them to a point where they're sold. And and having some sort of legal framework, we've found has been great for our clients in getting that ready to sell the business. And they've achieved, in our experience and the feedback that we've received, much higher returns based on that. So, as I said, I'm not going to bore you today. The purpose of this webinar isn't to go through and talk about the business legal life cycle, but with a lot of new attendees today, we wanted to just talk a little bit about that so that you're aware of it. And feel free to email Craig or myself about with any questions that you've got and how you think that might be useful for you and your clients. So without further ado, I'll go into the actual topic of what we're going to talk about today. And there's 3 main topics. We're going to talk about speed bumps to do with businesses that don't have a clear vision for the future. We're going to talk about the speed bump of cash flow, and we're going to talk about the speed bump of not protecting your intellectual property. Now, the reason that we've said that, as I said earlier, is that these are the top three problems that we've seen with small to medium-sized businesses. So we're going to talk about those today. As I said earlier, feel free to ask questions as we go along. We're going to both give some examples of different scenarios that have occurred in our experience, and we'd be really interested to know if anyone's got any similar scenarios that we could share with the group. So I'll start with no clear vision. So what we're talking about here is the first two phases of the business legal life cycle. I do apologise if the slides are a little bit delayed. I think it's just poor internet connection this time of day. So basically what we're talking about here is the beginning of a business. So when people get into the business and having a clear vision of where you're going in your business. Now, there are two different ways and different ways to look at this. The first is for a person entering into business on their own as a sole trader, and the other is entering into business with a partnership. Now, in both cases, not having a clear vision of where you're going is, in our view, potentially disastrous in your business. And the reason for that is that you get lost and you don't have a clear path of where you're actually going. Now, I'll acknowledge, and I'm the same as this, when you first start in business, it's a bit like when you get out of high school. Unless you're in the minority, the vast majority of people that I know anyway had no idea what they wanted to do when they came out of high school, and they might have gone to uni, they might have tried to start a business, they might have gone to work for various different companies, and they had no idea where they actually wanted to go in the future, and that's normal. And the same can be said for people starting a business. You might have a different business idea that might evolve, but having an idea of where you're going, and that's adopting a little bit of a change to Stephen Covey's thought of having the end in mind from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Having an end in mind will give, what we've seen, will give business owners a lot more clarity of where they're going in the future. So as I said, that can apply to a sole trader, and I think it's very important for a sole trader to have an idea where they're going in business, because otherwise they'll get lost in the business and nothing will come, they'll never get out of running in the business and being able to run on the business. But more of the focus I wanted to talk to today was about where you've got businesses that have got multiple owners. And so you'll see the first point coming up on this slide is, are the business owners aligned? Now, I think this is a very important thing and probably a thing that so many people miss when they're starting a business. And I think it's incumbent on us as advisors, as accountants and lawyers, when people come to see us and they're going to start their business, to have that discussion with their clients is to make sure that they're aligned with where they're going in the future. So a good example of that was just last week while we were getting this presentation prepared, I had a client come and see me and said, I want us to prepare a shareholders agreement. And I said, great. How many shareholders are there? There were 5 people in the business. It was a new business starting up. And I said, well, have you had any discussion about what you actually want from your business and where you're going? And the response was a blank face. And you've probably seen that before, anyone who's asked that question. They'd never actually sat down and talked about where they were going in their business and where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do. And I'll go through a few examples of speed bumps that we've seen in businesses as to why that's important. But I can tell you that those people, they went away, they had a few beers and a discussion over dinner one night, and they've come back and they're all aligned and they know where they want to go. And it's going to make the whole process of advising them on structures, on shareholders agreements, a heck of a lot easier in the long term. So that's an example of where they did, and they did have the discussion. They are aligned, and in my view, these guys are going to be much stronger from putting that work into their agreement. So the following examples I'm going to give, I will admit at the outset that they are extreme examples, but they are ones where people, in my experience, think that everything's right. So everyone goes into business when you're starting a business with rose-colored glasses. I get that. I did that. Craig did that. Everyone does that when they go into business. But people need to know the reality that of all businesses that start, I think the stat is in the first 3 years, 3 out of 5 of those will still be operating, and in another year, there's probably another couple that'll fall off out of what's left, And after 10 years, 9 out of those 10 businesses will have never succeeded and never gone anywhere in the future. And what I found really interesting, especially when I was researching my book, The Business Legal Life Cycle, just to throw another plug in there, was the fact that the Productivity Commission, the Australian Productivity Commission in 2015, outlined a report about business failure and what they could do to stop business failure. And what they found was that something like 90% of business failure was for a reason other than money. Now, as a lawyer who's done a lot of litigation, a lot of debt collection in the past, I found that really surprising. But what they said was if you go back to the root cause of the problem that caused the business to fail, it was from having a lack of planning. So whether that was a lack of succession planning, whether that was a lack of just foresight into where the business was going and alignment of the business owners, the majority of the reasons that businesses failed was a lack of planning. So yeah, as I say, these examples, some people, and I've had feedback that some people think these might be a bit extreme, but they do happen and they are important. So the first one is a business, two guys, one was a small-time property developer and the other was an architect. They saw an opportunity to buy a bunch of properties down at the Gold Coast. There was about 12 properties from memory, and what my client wanted to do always was to buy the properties on option agreements, get a put and call option on them, and then get an approval to build a 30-story tower on, I think it was Sovereign Island from memory. Now that, anyone who's been in the building game and knows the building industry will know that you can't build a 30-story building with no money. And there's probably about 3 or 4 companies in Australia that have the requisite experience and knowledge base and license to actually build that development. My client's business partner thought that they could actually build that without any money. He had in his name equity of no more than about $15,000, and my guy had nothing. He had just had got through some failed property developments. So they never had a discussion over what they actually wanted to do. So you had one business partner who had these grand plans of building the next 30-story tower on the Gold Coast, and the other one who just wanted to get the land, get the approval, flick it off to another developer and make a small tidy profit and build from there. What happened? When they realized that they weren't aligned, they decided to basically try and push each other out of the business, exclude each other from the business, and have a massive fight that ended up in the Supreme Court. And I'm not kidding, it ended up in the Supreme Court in January 2016 with barristers on both sides, solicitors on both sides. And when we finally got in there, the judge looked at everyone, had read all the material, and he said, and he quite rightly said, what is it that you guys want me to do? And essentially both parties wanted the judge to order that the other party had to do what was the company had to do what that person wanted. And the judge said, well, I'm not there to make commercial decisions, which, as I say, they're not, so he's quite right about that. And he said, this is a bus that's hurtling off the cliff, and both drivers are trying to grab a hold of the wheel. Go out of my courtroom and come back in after lunch. So this is about 10 o'clock in the morning. Come back after lunch and tell me how you resolved it. We went out. 4 hours later, they were still being belligerent at each other. They still hadn't resolved anything. So we went back into the courtroom. The judge said, asked my barrister, well, have you resolved it? And my barrister quite rightly said, well, Your Honour, it's now, the bus is now hurtling off the cliff at a faster pace. It's now caught fire, and nothing's going to be resolved without a court order. And the judge said, well, looked at both of the investors and said, well, you're both idiots. Get out of my courtroom. See you later. And they both lost not only the profits, but they lost close to $1 million. Now, you might ask how? Well, there's a lot of consultants. There's a lot of engineering. There's a lot of of work that goes into getting an approval for a 30-story tower. Plus, the landowners knew what they were doing. They wanted extensions. So landowners, quite rightly, they would say, and if you're acting for them, they'd agree, took non-refundable deposits of significant amounts of money for each property. So that's an example. As I say, it's an extreme example, but it's an example of a business partnership that if they had just had a discussion at the beginning, they would have realised that they could not work together because their their ideas and where they wanted to go were so far misaligned that it caused massive problems. The second example is a professional services firm. They were 4 business partners that entered into that business. The business, you had one business owner who wanted to sell the business. You had one business owner that wanted to just build up a large professional business and then sell it off. And you had 2 others that basically just thought that they'd do their own thing. So they acquired something like 30 offices around southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. And when the business owner who wanted to build it and sell it went to his business partners and said, "Oh, now it's time to sell," guess what happened? The other 3 walked away, and were not wanting to go ahead with the business anymore. Massive fight ensued. They were lucky; they didn't need to go to the Supreme Court to resolve their dispute, but it still cost them a lot of money, put them all back a long, long way. So that's another example of a massive speed bump to their business. They've all gone their separate ways now. They're all starting to trade well, but you can imagine had they just had that conversation to begin with, they would never have got to that situation in the future. And the last example I wanted to give on this was the example of a debt collection agency. There were 2 business partners in this debt collection agency, and they had the idea of starting a debt collection agency. One wanted to just focus on business clients and customers, and the other wanted to basically be a full services debt collection company. They did this exercise and realised that they were massively misaligned on where they wanted to go with their business. One wanted to just act for businesses, and one wanted to just take on every single debt collection matter that came through their door. Now, what happened, of course, was that they had this discussion, and they were able to split their business very early on in the piece and mean that they weren't misaligned, and basically stop them from having a massive fight in the future. Because you can imagine if you have one business owner just trying to build the business from one side and another building it from another side, you're going to have problems when the one who just wants business debts all of a sudden gets personal debts. So just having that simple discussion meant that they didn't get into business together. They had formed a company and had started trading, but they were able to extricate each other reasonably easy and at not much cost because they had the discussion at the beginning. So the big lesson I wanted to get out of my talk today, and I'll wrap up my side of it, is that really you need to be, as advisors, when people are going into business, have a conversation, make sure they have a conversation with each other over where they're going, make sure that they're aligned as business owners, and make sure that they have a plan for the future. So, as I say, the examples are extreme, but there's many other examples of minor problems that have come up in the past where people haven't had that discussion. So I'd be interested in any feedback from any of you, if you can give me any examples of where you've seen that work or not work. We can revisit those in the questions after Craig's finished. But yeah, I'll hand over to Craig, and if you've got any examples or any questions, please let me know.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. So the next speed bump that we wanted to talk about is around cash flow. So obviously without cash flow coming into a business, it won't survive, and you as accountants would see that all the time, that if the cash isn't coming in, then the business is going to fail. The key to this, however, is to have regular flow of cash without having to spend too many resources on making sure that it's coming in, i.e. collecting the cash. Putting things in place early, i.e. at the stage of phase 3 of the business, when you're bringing on your initial clients, that's the time where you need to put measures in place to ensure that you've got cash flow coming into the business and you've got a clear policy to deal with these things. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a credit policy. So that's your internal document within the business that sets out what is going to happen, how or who's the authorised person to allow credit to be provided to a customer, the payment terms of your invoices, the debt collection process. So what's going to happen if an invoice is outstanding, who's going to send the follow-up email, when is the email sent, those sorts of things. And the key to a good credit policy is one, that it's actually followed, but the The other one is that you have one sort of authorised person that takes control of it. And that's the person that makes the decisions about providing credit. So if you're in a business where you're not just getting paid cash up front for your goods or your services, then you're essentially providing credit to your customers because you're doing work or providing goods and they're paying you later. So there needs to be one person responsible to check the prospective person or customer out to make sure that they've got the right credentials, that you're not going to be left with unpaid invoices. So you might be doing, as part of your credit policy, there could be credit checks on the customer. So you might be checking the default listings on their credit. You might be checking the courts to see if there's any litigation matters on foot, those sorts of things. And then, provided all those checks and measures have been done, then the authorised person would then provide that credit. So as I said, this is an internal policy within the business. About the only part of it that would be external, as in your customers would know about, would be your payment terms as to when invoices are due and due and payable. But the key to it is obviously just to ensure that everyone knows within the business, what's the process, and on that basis, if everyone follows that, there's going to be consistency and there's not going to be any holes in any of the process. So the speed bump example I wanted to give about a credit policy and not following that is about invoicing. So the key to it is obviously, you always want to have a process for invoicing. It's done straight after you've completed the work. There's no errors in the invoice, so there's a template. Someone checks it to make sure that it describes the goods properly or the services, that it's dated properly, that it's addressed to the right party, those sorts of things. Because if you don't follow that process and you send an invoice out and it's got an incorrect description on there, or it's sent to a different entity, or the date is 2016 instead of 2017, or something along those lines, then people are going to use that as a reason not to pay. And then you've got to go back and reissue the invoice, and then you're further down the track without getting paid. But in this particular example, they didn't invoice it quickly. For whatever reason, it fell through the cracks, and it was a few months later that they realised they hadn't invoiced it. They sent the invoice to the foreman on the job site that they were dealing with, and of course that foreman unfortunately had actually left that role. And the invoice never actually came to the attention of the customer for some time. They did eventually follow it up. They didn't follow their debt collection process. They didn't follow it up, straight away after 7 days, for instance, after the invoice was issued. And lo and behold, the customer said, well, I'm not paying for that because you didn't invoice me when you did the work. I've already finalised that matter. So they were doing a job on behalf of a property developer and building a commercial structure on this property, and we were responsible for the fences. So they basically said, well, you didn't invoice quickly. How can I pass that cost on to my customer now? They've already finalised the matter. And of course, you could say in response to that, well, why didn't you follow me up for an invoice when you knew that I'd done the work? But regardless of that, if they had followed their policy, had followed the debt collection guidelines that they had or didn't have, then these issues would have been avoided. The invoice would have been sent out straight away. It would have been followed up straight away. When it got sent to the incorrect person, that would have been discovered straight away because they would have followed it up. The foreman was no longer there. They would have spoken to someone else, and it probably would have been resolved a lot quicker. But unfortunately, now it's a dispute, and they may not get paid, or they might have to take a compromise on a commercial basis, because it's going to cost them more money to chase the debt. So the other part to this is the external documents that you have in your business. So your engagement letters, your client agreements, your credit applications, those sorts of documents. They also need to include terms and conditions, and they should be tailored towards the actual business, not copy and pasted from the internet somewhere. It needs to outline consequences of non-payments. If you're in the building industry or supplying goods on credit, Normally you'd be asking for a personal guarantee from a director. They'll have retention of title clauses in there. They'll have various warranties. And the key to all this is to put you back in the same spot if you had been paid within your terms. So if you have to chase someone, then you want to be able to charge them administrative fees. You want to be able to charge interest. You want to be able to charge collection costs, legal fees, those sorts of things. So it puts you back and compensates you for the loss of not getting paid straight away, because you're obviously paying interest if there's any loans, those sorts of things. And it also allows you to make sure you know who you're doing business with. So you get all that information and you can do your credit checks as per your credit policy. The unfortunate example where this is a speed bump for a business, an urgent customer contacted a goods business, waterproofing supplies. They urgently needed to get some goods to finalise a job. They needed about $12,000 worth of goods. They did complete a credit application. They provided it to the business, and unfortunately the credit policy wasn't adhered to. The goods were provided to the customer, and unfortunately, given that it's a speed bump example, something bad must have happened, and you're right, they didn't get paid the $12,000 for the goods. Unfortunately, at the time when the credit application came back, they didn't follow their policy. They didn't do the checks and measures as per the policy. And there was a few things that were wrong. One, the personal guarantee section wasn't filled out. So the only person they could pursue was the company that purchased the goods. They also didn't do their regular credit checks on the company and the directors of that company, just to see if everything, they were paying all of their other suppliers, etc. If they hadn't done that, they would have seen that there were some credit default listings on their file. They also had a Supreme Court wind-up application that was pending and had been filed recently. Those sorts of things, if they had done the checks and measures, would have been seen, and they would have then, as per the policy, said, well, we're not going to give you credit because we've seen those things, or they would have insisted on the personal guarantee being signed. A number of suppliers, the reason why it was urgent, they needed the goods from this particular business, was because they'd burn all their bridges with all the other competitors, and no one else would provide them with any goods. So they managed to get this one through the keeper, I guess, unfortunately, and this particular business is out of pocket $12,000. The director in the end did have a number of properties, and if they had the personal guarantee, then they could have attacked those assets. But unfortunately they didn't. The business was eventually wound up, a liquidator appointed, and now they're in the hands of the liquidator in terms of whether they ever actually get paid for their goods. Even if they had retention of title clauses and those things that would have protected them, these goods were commingled anyway, so they couldn't retrieve them under the liquidation. So they were basically stuck as an unsecured creditor with no real prospect of receiving any dividends. So obviously, pretty large speed bump in the cash flow of any business when you're selling goods and not getting paid. The last speed bump is regarding intellectual property, and this is phase 5 of the business legal life cycle, and it's around intellectual property. So you've got your trademarks, your designs, inventions, customer lists, your procedures within the business, the business name, images, those sorts of things. And it's about, there's two sort of things within this. Is one, actually protecting it, so making sure you've trademarked things if you have something that can be trademarked, or patent if you're in that sort of area, if it's an invention, and you have some structures about actually protecting that intellectual property. The other step that you might want to take is instead of having intellectual property held in your trading entity, that you might incorporate a new entity that will own that intellectual property. So it's a separate entity. So if you ever were sued as your trading entity, then your intellectual property, provided it was owned by the other entity, would obviously be protected in that sense. So the speed bump examples are about both of those issues. One is not going and looking at your business first before you start doing things. So they were selling some goods. They didn't look into the image that they were going to use. They had a nice image, and they started printing labels for their goods, and they had some agreements with various shops that were going to be selling them. And they then thought, oh, okay, well, we better trademark our image, and they started that process. Unfortunately, they were using an image that was synonymous with a particular structure that someone else owned, and once all the process started, of course, they got a threatening letter from a lawyer about using their image, and that they lost profits and any profits they might get from using it, etc., etc. And so they needed to now go through the process of changing all their labels. They'd spent all the money on doing those things. If they hadn't looked at it first, gone to see a consultant, then they would have seen that, or been told that perhaps that wasn't a great idea to use that image, and gone down a different process. So they lost money on printing, lost opportunity there. They had designers, all sorts of things. So they lost all of that, and then they were behind. There was potential that they were going to be a breach of contracts for not providing the goods as per the agreement they had. So they had a few issues. So it could have been all overcome by looking at it a lot earlier than what they did. The other thing is with protecting intellectual property and having a different structure or a different entity that owns that. And looking at that early and having that set up early is, if you don't do it early, then you've got to look at it down the track. You've now started accumulating more valuable intellectual property, so you might have books or various other things that you've developed over time. And at that stage, then transferring the ownership into the other structure is is going to become more costly. So the example of that is, exactly that. They had a business. They looked at it before and thought, oh, maybe we should set up a different structure. They didn't at that stage because they didn't really appreciate why to do that. They then accumulated a number of things, books, example, etc. And the advice then, they wanted to protect that, and the cost of doing that, was obviously a lot higher now because of the time that elapsed. But if they had looked at it first, it would have been a lot less, and they wouldn't have had the issues of potential opening of someone to attack those assets of the business. So I guess the speed bump there is to look at these things early. Don't do it after you've got an issue. Do it within the phase of your life cycle of your business. And if you have all these things set up first, then you're going to be in the best possible spot for protecting intellectual property. They're the three speed bumps that we wanted to talk about today. As we've sort of said throughout the webinar, it isn't too late to put something in place to avoid these speed bumps. Obviously, sitting down with your business partners and talking about your vision, making sure it's clear, making sure everyone's on the same page, and documenting that. It's not too late to do that. As the speed bump example that Jeremy said, where the parties met and they realised that they weren't on the same page, they could then go their separate ways and do that. So it's never too late to do that. Obviously, with your engagement documents and your policies and those sorts of things internal to your business, you can't go backwards. You can't retrospectively apply your terms and conditions to your current customers, but you can for your future ones or the future transactions you might have with your current customers. So getting those sorts of things in place, it's never too late to do that. So I'd encourage everyone to have a think about that. And same with intellectual property. It might end up costing a little bit more to set up those structures now or transferring it over, but having it right now will give you peace of mind that you're protected. And it could be another 10 years down the track that you'll see that protecting it now meant that you didn't lose out if you were sued in your trading entity, for example. So we can't stress enough that it's never too late to think about these things, and we encourage everyone to do that. So they were the speed bumps. Does anyone have any questions?
Give it a few minutes. Oh, yeah, give it a few minutes. We've deliberately gone a bit early this time because it's everyone's busy this time of year. We know what everyone's like. So if anyone's got any questions, just let us know. As I said before, feel free to email us. Our emails are on the front side. If you've got any questions, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and give you any advice as we can. For anyone who doesn't know about us, we have offices in Morningside in Brisbane and Caboolture, and we're across all the social medias, and we can be contacted through any of those ports. All right, doesn't seem like anyone's got any questions. Well, I hope everyone got something out of this today. We certainly enjoyed presenting it, and we're looking forward to the next one. If you've got any topics that would be useful for you, that would be of interest to you, please feel free to email us. We've done this one deliberately a little bit differently to give you guys a taste, and yeah, that would be great. There is one question. It's just coming up, Colleen, as PPSR. I wasn't 100% sure what the question was.
If it's around the example I gave about the goods that were supplied. Okay.
For a future topic on the PPSR, that's a great idea. Yeah, so we'll look at doing a topic around the PPSR and its obligations and everything for the future. Absolutely. Yeah, we might schedule that one in for next quarter. Well, as I said, thank you to everyone for attending. I hope you got something out of it, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. As I said before, always feel free to get in contact with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.